Hello, everyone. Welcome to our workshop today on invoking web services from Nitro Components. I am James Restivo from Croquet Software. We are going to maybe wait another minute or so for folks to dial in and get logged on. Looks like we got a few more popping on now. So we'll get, I do want to get right into it, though. I don't like to have a lot of fluff ahead of time. With this, that, and the other thing. But I will talk about web services and some, kind of conceptually a little bit. A lot of you might be familiar with that already, but I also did want to dig into the kind of mechanics of it a little bit and how it incorporates into the whole Nitro Studio construct and how you can use it in workflows and custom actions. Looks like we have a few more folks pop on. All right, welcome to the webinar. Again, my name is James Restivo from Croquet Software. I'm going to be sharing my screen in just a moment here. I have not started sharing it yet. So let me go ahead and do that. Make sure I get the right one going here. And yeah, that looks good. All right. Now, okay. So we'll be working off of this article actually that we have up on .help that talks in depth about what the setup is for this this action in our workflows and in our custom actions. And when we're talking about invoking web services, we're basically talking about you're enhancing what Nitro can do for you as far as interaction and integration with other systems, whether that's passing information out of SharePoint into another system or parsing information that gets returned as a response to the API call through the workflow or custom action. And there are a lot of things that you're going to need to set up ahead of time. So this is one of the few things we have in Nitro where it is kind of trending more towards that low code side of things rather than the no code. We do have a lot of things in Nitro that are no code. The forms designer is very easy to use, WYSIWYG designer interface. A lot of the workflow actions are easily set up, kind of intuitive, logical construct to them. Not that this isn't logical, but it's more of a code-based sort of thing. So it does require some knowledge of what is going on with REST APIs and those types of calls ahead of time. And so what I'm hoping to do on today's call is kind of highlight how what we have in Nitro can help you build out those things and how you can use the SharePoint information to inform how that REST API call is built, right? So we'll talk about the different components within that action and where the different things come from. So there's probably a mixed bag of people who are really familiar with how to set up REST APIs and do those types of calls, and there are probably folks on here who've never done it before. So this kind of be a little bit in between. It's not gonna be super like code heavy. I'm not actually going to do a call right now because it does require passwords and client secrets and client IDs of apps that I don't want to have shared out on the webinar. So I do want to point that out. We're not going to do an actual like REST API call on the demo today, but it will show you how it's set up and conceptually how you build it. And because how that REST API is built is really dependent on the service that you're interacting with, right? So sure, you can have a REST API for Dropbox. You can have a REST API for QuickBooks. You can have a REST API to talk to another SharePoint tenant, but all three of those, there's different things you can do, different parameters involved, different amount of headers that you have to put in there. So it's really variable in how that REST API actually gets built. So what we're providing with Nitro is sort of the framework to build that REST API call. So that's why we're not going to get into the actual specifics of doing that an actual REST API call today, or actually doing it, I should say. We'll talk a little bit about the specifics though. In general, though, the whole idea behind it is that a lot of web-based, cloud-based tools use REST, which is a particular type of, I forgot what it stands for. I know something about state transfer. I forgot off the top of my head, but it should be pretty common. It's pretty much a lot of the cloud services have that option out there where you can use a REST API to either get information or post information to that source. And you'll see in here we have some of the information I just talked about in our article on our .help site. It talks about you know, what we can do with it. You can use different types of authentication. We can update information, insert information, fetch data, and use it in further down in the workflow or custom action that we're creating. We have a couple of functions, which I'll talk about, which parse that data response from the REST API call to that you can then use to create items or update items in SharePoint. There's, you know, all of it's encrypted, so if there's any sensitive information, that's all going to be encrypted. And then there's also custom authentication scenarios. But, you know, kind of like what I talked about, you know, you're going to need to know a few things ahead of time before you start configuring the REST API call. You're not going to just be going through and all of a sudden do it. There's a lot you kind of have to put together ahead of time to build that REST API call. And one of those is going to be the URL of that service. So where does that go? And that's going to be housed in the API documentation of the service you're trying to communicate with. So for instance, what I pulled up here, you know, all publicly available information here is, you know, QuickBooks. They have a particular API. They have a particular construct of how that REST API call is going to be built, right? So we have a URL. So since it's all cloud service, it's always, a lot of it's going to be accessible over the internet. So we have a particular call, URL that we're using to make that call. And then there's particular things that we're going to do within that to different operations, right? So we have creating and update operations, reading operations, and maybe posting or deleting operations. And that's all built through that URL in that you're building out in that REST API call. And that you'll have to go to your API documentation of whatever service you're communicating with to get that information. And you'll see over here, we also have, I pulled up the Dropbox information, which you can see from the scroll bar on the right is just a wealth, a whole wealth of information that you can do with Dropbox. So that's what I mean. I'm not going to get into those specifics necessarily, but just kind of generally speaking, you know, you're going to want to refer to your your service's REST API documentation to know how to build this out. So we're going to need the URL of the service. We need to know what kind of authentication you're going to have. We got to know what the headers are going to look like, and the different headers can do different things within that REST API call. What that syntax should look like when in the body of the data, and just kind of in general what that looks like. You can see over here we've got on this QuickBooks documentation, just kind of show you. There's the call we're making, the URL that is being used. You know, here's that. You know, some of the headers. These are headers here. The authorization type. So all that, you know, rather than building out in a construct like this or in JavaScript, we have the fields, kind of placeholders in our REST API action to intake this information. So we gotta have, gotta have that body information, and a few other details of things that you might need to make it work. And in general, and a lot of you probably know this, whenever you're communicating with a service, whether it's Dropbox, SharePoint, Office, QuickBooks, whatever the service is that you're communicating to, you're going to need to have some kind of app that is basically creating that connection between the REST API call or reading that REST API call and then knowing what to do with it, right? So we usually have to have some kind of app. And when we create that app, we're going to get that client ID and client secret, which you'll see later on in the process. When we're invoking the action, we need to input that information, down here. Like maybe if we're using the OAuth 2 option for the authentication, we'd want to make sure we have that client ID, client secret, from our services. So a few things we need like that. We need to know what we want to do with it. So, once we get we got the app, we got the client ID, we've got the secret, we've got, we know now we got to know what we're going to do, which there's some, different methods that we have here. These methods are in our tool, but they're pretty much, these are the commonly available methods in any API call that you're going to see out there. Right, so we can do get method, post method, put method, delete, JSONP. We can do all those. And the nice thing about using Nitro workflows or custom actions for this is that you can use placeholders for your headers and for your data and for even for your authentication. Like there's part of the process we can talk about briefly that where you have to go and like authenticate separately, get back that authentication token and use that further in your Invoke process. So we got that information. We got the, we got build out the headers, authentication, different types of authentication, resources. You can see there's different parameters. I was working on a action earlier, Invoke Web Service action, where it's going to create an item in one SharePoint list from one tenant from a different SharePoint tenant. And that's kind of what this looks like. It's got one resource, one parameter. But those parameters can be pulled in from, there could be a lot of other parameters. Like I took a look at this Dropbox API documentation. There's like a whole host of different parameters that you might use for each type of call that you're making. You see there's a whole, let me pull this up right here. This is all these different parameters that you can put in there, and you can build that up, right? So you can build up those parameters. It doesn't take just one. You can put in a whole bunch. Things like that. So that's part of the authentication, and then the data part of it is, okay, what are we actually sending to that REST API service? And then we're going to get some kind of response from that REST API service, and then we have to do something with it. So that's kind of like the quick, really fast overview of what REST APIs are all about and how we're looking at them. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual construct of this within the context of a workflow or a custom action. So we're going to do this within a workflow here. This is in a purchasing site that we have, where you might want to post the PO number to another database like the Salesforce or something like that, where once the PO is created, let's say we do workflow when the PO is created, we're going to go and post information to Salesforce. Now, of course, we have to go and get all of our Salesforce information. What are the URLs we should use? What are the different actions? What does that data look like? But assuming we have all that information, I can kind of show you what that would look like post PO to Salesforce. So I'm going to do this when PO is created in our system over here. And you're going to see that Invoke Web Service action. That's going to be there in custom actions and in workflows. And name, it can be whatever, post PO to Salesforce. Now, of course, the URL, that's going to be what we get from Salesforce. And I can even do a quick search out here. If we go to here, I can do Salesforce API. And I know that they're going to have stuff out there. And you see there's some information about that. There's some guides that we'd have to pull into. Well, okay, I'd have to pull up the actual guide to do that. But let's say we're going to post it to QuickBooks, just so I have something to put in here to show you. So we're going to create an item in QuickBooks based on the PO number that was created. So we get our URL over here, pop that in, and then we're going to get the rest of it here. As you see, it's keying off this base URL, which is this one right here. We just take that data, put it into our URL. Now the method, you can see we have those methods I was talking about: the get, the post, the put, the delete. They're going to do different things. Get's going to get information. Post is going to allow you to post information or update an existing record. I think put is something similar, where it will update an existing record. We could delete information. JSON P, I'm not super familiar with, but I guess it does something else. But let's say we're going to post information up into our QuickBooks system, and we can come back over here and you can see that there's different headers. But these different headers are going to vary based on what you're trying to do. And you can have one or more headers. You can have as many as you need. So if you need to use all 7 of these or 6 of these, you could do that. If you just need to use one, some of them just use content type, some just use, except seems to be pretty commonly used. I've seen that one in a lot of the examples I was reviewing before this call. It does say it's optional, but let's say you want to put that in there. And we can do that through the headers interface. So we just go ahead and hit the plus button, and we can enter as many headers as we want. So you can see the key is going to map over to the field name over here. So it could be field name, it could be called key, it could be a number of different things that you're referring to it as. But it's going to be these kind of like short snippets here, which are pretty common across the REST API infrastructure. So let's do accept, and then we'll do a value, and that value we can get from our documentation as well. In this case, let's see, I actually have it selectable over here. Let me do it over here. So you see, even in our examples, we're using that same accept key, and then it's the same like kind of a JSON verbose kind of thing. Pop that in. So we got one header here. Now, if we need more headers, that's simple enough. We just hit the plus button, and now we can keep adding headers as we go for as many as we need. So in this case here, we got content type. I'm just going to use this as an example over here. And actually, I don't know if the capitalization really matters, but I'm just going to make it capitalized just because that matches what we see over here. You see there's content type over here. I'm just going to copy this and put it over there. All right, so we probably have to add a few more headers in there to make it work the way you want. And again, that is going to map over to what you see over here on the screenshot for QuickBooks. You have these headers. This is basically what we're doing. We're taking the accept, the content type. That's going to be what we built. So when Nitro workflow is run, or when the custom action is run, we're basically building this on the fly, right? We're building this to say, here's our headers, here's our authorization, here's our URL, here's what the action is with post, get, or whatever, and here's the data that we're sending over to that app on that database to be consumed. So you can keep building out the headers as many as you need. Let's just leave it at those two. Authentication, there's a few different options for authentication. So you can do no authentication, that's an option. A lot of the systems use bearer tokens, where you'd have to put the bearer token, and there, I'll read through in our documentation, there is a section where we talk about getting a token and using that to create a bearer token. Basic authentication is basically just a username and password. And then a lot of systems use this OAuth 2, which is more secure, where you can use different credentials. We have the password credentials, which is probably slightly less secure. There's also the client credentials, which is where I was talking about that app that you might need to create. A lot of these REST APIs require an app to be created on the target database. It's really easy to create these. There's a lot of documentation within the API documentation on how to do it. You can see over here on the like on the Dropbox one, I don't know if I have a link to it directly, but I think over here we can create, get started, go create apps, right? So, yeah, there's definitely links in here to do it. I didn't have it pulled up specifically for this particular one, unfortunately, but it is in here on how to create a QuickBooks app. So as long as you have a login to QuickBooks, as a kind of a owner of the account, you can go and create create an application that's going to give you that client ID and client secret, which is what we're looking for here. Access token URL, that's going to come from your API documentation as well. And then the parameters. So when we add the parameters, it looks like this. We'll have our key over here. Let's say we do resource, and then our value over here. Again, as per our API documentation, that's what we want to put in here. So for our Dropbox APIs, you can see these different ones, response type. I don't want to mix and match too much, but just kind of show you can take like response type, pop that in to your key, and then whatever the value is that's looking for, you can put that in here. You can see in this case, it's looking for a string, but it could be looking for other things as well. Cancel that. So once you get your authorization set up, your credentials, you can go and save that, and then you put in your data. So the interesting thing about the data here, just to make a note on that, you'll notice that you have on this side, on the example API documentation that I have over here, double quotes. Now, unfortunately, in the construct of the data part, you're going to need to use single quotes, just the way the code is handled when running that workflow or running that custom action. We should be putting in single quotes. So you could take something like this, if you have an example, or if you have it written out, or if you have it already built in JavaScript or in some other code that you want to plop it into a custom action or a workflow. You can copy what you already have and just go through and change up those references to be, and you can expand this box here, which is kind of nice. Gives you a little more room to work with. You can take those double quotes and just go in through and hit the, just change them to the single quote. So that's essentially what you need to do. Just go through, do it either in here or on the, before you copy and paste it, and you can do that. It's kind of up to you. But essentially, there's one key thing to note is that the data input here is going to be looking at the single quote versus the double quote. I forget exactly why. I think it's just the way the code is constructed to work. But the thing about it too is that, and I don't see the placeholder thing here. I think it's in custom actions, not in workflows, but you can put in placeholders. So let's say you wanted to, you had a field on your, let's just say, for instance, you have a field on your SharePoint list called services, and you wanted to reference it. So you do this, and you guys should be pretty familiar with referencing fields in SharePoint or in Nitro. You do services like that, and that's going to create a placeholder for you. So now you can create a placeholder in your data. You can do that. You can actually use a placeholder up here in your headers. You could do it in the authentication piece. When we talk about the bearer token, I'll show you what that means. And then that's that's how you build that construct. So you can do we could either use this or get rid of it. Let's use it actually. Again, that. Just for completeness sake, I'm just going to go through and add the single quote there. See, that's going to be what it looks like. So instead of the double quote, you want to use the single quote in your data, and then you can just go through and add your placeholders if you want to use placeholders in your data as well, and that's going to help drive things. So if, like in our example over here on the documentation, even in the URL, we can use placeholders, and you can see right here, if we're mapping or reading something from a SharePoint list or mapping to a SharePoint list, you have placeholders that you can use. Here's that ID field if you wanted to, in this case, we're going to be updating a list item on a SharePoint list, in a SharePoint list called tickets, as a matter of fact. But this is kind of the standard API that SharePoint has as well. If you wanted to map things from one tenant to another, you could do that and use this API here for that purpose. So placeholders can be there. They can kind of be wherever you need them to be. And I want to talk about this bearer token authentication, because in some cases you might need to go and authenticate, get a token, or I think you get there's an authorization piece where you go and get the token, and then there's an authentication piece where now you're using that token to authenticate into that service. Kind of a differentiation there of authorization versus authentication. But in the one hand, what we're doing is we're going to, this again for SharePoint, this is pretty common standard thing. You go and get your tenant URL, do an authorization, and then we're getting back some information. So we're going to go get some credentials, and we're going to now refer to that token. So if we come down here, you can see we can refer to that bearer token in our authentication piece using this JSON Path 2. So we have the JSON Path 2 function, and we also have a XPath function. Both of those are used depending on what that response looks like from the server when that REST API is invoked. So let's say you get back JSON from that REST API. Again, that's dependent on the database and then the target, where you're actually referring to. You can take that information and parse parse that JSON and get the token. So in this case, we're getting the token, and we are, we're going to put that into the value, and then you can see here, and where is it? I know we have it here somewhere. JSON Path 2. So here is kind of written out. You can see you got the JSON Path 2. We're referring to that previous action, and then we're getting that token type. So that's part of the JSON file. Is there's a token header, and you get the type of token from there. There's also an access token, so we can get those things. But you can see you can use those placeholders even within the authentication piece to use information that you've captured from a previous Invoke workflow or Invoke Web Services. So you can actually cascade these Invoke Web Services. Go get information from here, put that in a variable, and then go and get information from somewhere else based on that variable. And so you can even use that Invoke Web Services action multiple times within the same workflow, within the same custom action, to get information from different sources, and maybe put it all together into one, maybe creating one SharePoint item. Right, go get information from QuickBooks, go get information from our CRM, go get information from over here, and create a record in SharePoint for it. And a lot of that's done through that part's gonna be done through like the common variable stuff that we have, but you also got you want to use these JSON Path 2 functions. And then if that response comes as XML, there's an XPath function as well that does something very similar. I think it's a little further down in here. Let me just pull down to it. Where is it? I know we had it in here. Sorry, I know it's in here. Let me just there it is. Okay, using XPath. So if it comes back as an XML, we can use that XPath function to get that information. And so either JSON, I think, is more common. So we take the JSON response and get that. But you can see there's the JSON response. Here's another kind of example we have in here where it's we're getting the information, and we're getting the information from data, and we're so we're mapping that kind of parsing that JSON file. But yeah, so then so we send this out. We can now, this is a post, but let's say we want to do a get. Instead, if we do a get, then we can get those variable mappings. We can use that JSON path too. We can use that XPath, whatever it might be, create some variables, and then use those variables later on in our processing to continue the process, whether it's creating items in SharePoint or creating a users list or something like that. We can get that information. Now, one of the things you can do here too, which is kind of neat, is you can kind of recursively go through the information that was returned. And let's see, it's at collection value. Boop. Yeah, so it's at collection value function. So this is really cool, and I'm going to talk about this in our next workshop, which is going to be around how to do like kind of for each loops within this stuff using either query lists or this AtCollectionValue actually lets you do it kind of on within the column mappings. We're basically going to look at all the information that was returned. So in this case, let's say let me just go back to the top here, kind of get the context of this particular action that we're working on. So we go and we're going to get multiple records from our REST API, and so we go through, we build out our Invoke Web Service. We got this one web service here, Invoke Web Service action. That's going to go and pull back information. We got this variable we've defined. We're going to run this action. We're going to get the information. This one doesn't require headers or authentication in this particular case, but basically we've got the information. We've got our variable, and basically what we're saying here is we're going to take what we get back from this call here and put it into this variable here, right? So we created our create our variable here, the all users data variable. So we can get the information, put it into that variable, and then we can use it. So now, because we're pulling back multiple records, we want to use this thing called AtCollectionValue. So this AtCollectionValue is basically going to say, okay, we got multiple records back. Let's go back and create an item for each one of these records. So what we're doing here, we're creating users. This is an add list item action. We're creating users. We're doing it in a particular list, and we're going through and using that AtCollectionValue to get the first name, last name, etc. So that you can see that part of it is the JSON reference to that data point, and then we're putting it into the first name, which is the field on our SharePoint list. And when we do it for multiple items, we get multiple items returned with that REST API. We can use that AtCollectionValue function, and it's going to create each one of these items. So it's going to create the based on that response. So it knows in this case here, we can take a quick look at that JSON response right here. You can see here's what that response looks like. We got first name, last name. It's going to go through and say, okay, here's the first name for this one, here's the last name for this one, here's the email for this one, and it's going to put that information in. And then it's going to go and say, okay, is there Okay, it's AtCollectionValue. So is there another one? Okay, yeah, there's another one. So let's go through and create an item for this one here, right? And same thing, kind of run through it until you've run out of data. So that's one way you can use that kind of multiple records being returned from that REST API and put it into multiple items on your SharePoint list. So that's really valuable when you're getting information, you're using that get command, and then using that information that gets returned to do something in SharePoint. In this case, create items in a SharePoint list. Yeah, so it's kind of similarly, XPath function is kind of the same idea, just a different construct and kind of a different way to build it out based on what that the XPath is, the XML is that gets returned. And we created a quick example here to show Dropbox. It's basically just creating a text file in Dropbox, but you can see from the Dropbox documentation, there's a lot more you can do there. Yeah, that's kind of the idea behind it. You can get the web service. You can have that web service do kind of a simple thing. Maybe it's one simple thing, goes and gets the information, pulls it back in, creates a variable, and then you put that information into a SharePoint item. Maybe it's pulling back multiple items like we just saw. Okay, now we go and put that multiple information in there. Or we want to update items in a database. That's where we could do the post information, the post method to go and update items in that database. And then we can use our placeholders to update what that data should be on that item in the database. So then, it's kind of the long and short of it, like a cascade, cascade things. Okay, so then looks like we got a couple questions coming in. So let me just take a quick peek at those and see what people are asking. When does this data update? I was told it updates on save and this method is not real time. Okay, so that's a good question. When does this data update? So I assume you mean when when we're posting information to a list or when we're getting information. I think either way, it kind of depends on whether you're using the custom action or workflows. If you're using custom actions, typically it should happen fairly immediately. It may not be exactly real time, might be offset by a couple minutes, but it might just take time to be invoked. But if you're doing workflows, especially if it's a timer-based workflow, it could be delayed. So I would like to maybe dig into that one a little more and understand when is this data being updated. I can get some more information on that and get back to you on that question. Another question is, how do we find how many items were returned in a collection? Well, you can actually do that by, I believe what you can do is get the response and put the information into they can actually take that JSON that gets response and put it in a multi-line text field and see what that looks like, and then you could and then you can see how many items get returned. But I don't think there's a way to know if you're embedding it into the workflow and using that AtCollectionValue function. I don't think there's a way to know offhand how many items are going to get returned before you run that action. But I will check into that and get more information on that for you. What kind of performance hit is there when you want to populate a SharePoint list with, say, 100,000 items? All right, so I assume the use case here, 10,000 items. I assume the use case here is that you're going to use the web service to pull information and then create multiple items in your SharePoint list from that information. I think there would be somewhat of a SharePoint performance hit. I'd have to check into that to see how that would actually play out. I don't know if we've tested for that many items, creating that many items from a response from a REST API call. We'd have to look into that one for you too. Okay, in that case, user would be doing a query from the form looking for specific information. Okay, that's a good, and that actually brings up another good point that I forgot to highlight here, as I was talking about this whole construct from the standpoint of custom actions and workflows. But you can, with again going to the low code part of Nitro, you can use the Nitro Forms. I think it's right up here at the top, actually. You can use Nitro Forms and use a JavaScript to invoke that REST API and process the response. So it won't be the same kind of information that you're seeing on the workflows that I was just showing you, or the custom action interface, which looks pretty much the same as that workflow interface I was showing you. You kind of have to build that out and use it that way. But I guess, I don't know, I guess embedded in that question is maybe you're experiencing some kind of delay. I'll have to look into that because it should happen fairly quickly, fairly immediately. It's really dependent on, at that point, it's kind of dependent on SharePoint and how the target system that you're getting information from is responding to that call. That might be delayed on that response side. It's hard to know without knowing that specific scenario, what's actually happening there. But from our side, it should invoke that pretty much right away. If you click a button and execute a script like you can do on Nitro Forms, and embedded in that script is that REST API call, it should work fairly immediately. But if you're experiencing delays on that, let me know, and we can maybe dig into that one specifically. Okay, so can you use the data returned by API call to fill the fields of a form before the item gets saved? Yes, so that kind of talks to what I was just kind of part of the answer I just had for that previous question about using the form. You can embed API calls onto the form itself, where you're hitting an execute script button and running the API call. So again, this is kind of trending towards that more of the low code side of Nitro, where you kind of have to build that out yourself. We don't have a UI for building out that REST API call within a Nitro form at this point. But that would fulfill that purpose of getting the information and populating it on your form before the user hits the save button on that form. So yes, we can use REST APIs to get the information from a different database and put that information, pull that information onto the form. All right. A web service calls synchronous or asynchronous? I believe they are synchronous. I think they happen at the time the action is executed, and we could delay it, but I believe it is synchronous. I can double check on that for you. Okay. And if there's any other questions, some of you found that questions box. I forgot to mention it up front on the top of the call, but there is a questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. And if you have any additional questions that we haven't covered or anything else that you want to know about the service, pop that in there. If I can't answer it, I'll get some, I'll check with our team and get you the answer for that. We'll go from there. So let's see, another question just popped in. For the JavaScript option call, do the authentication options change? Whatever call we authenticate as the user using the form? That's a good question, because when you're doing the JavaScript option on the form, that's kind of up to you. It depends on how you construct that call itself, because you can see here within this call, you can have the authorization be a bearer token. We can also do a basic authentication with the username and password, but that is you can probably take some placeholders there in the JavaScript to do it. But I think that's more on you. Like, yeah, it's up to you how you want to do it. If you want to authenticate on logged in user, you can do that. If you want to authenticate using OAuth 2, you should be able to do that. But that, if you're using that JavaScript option on the form, I think there's more, it's more free form, I guess you could say. And those options are all there and should be possible. Okay. All right, well, keep an eye on that. If any other questions pop in, I'll definitely jump over and take a look at them. JavaScript is using the custom script option. So, okay, that's a good question. So JavaScript option that I'm referring to here, because it sounds like what some of you are looking for. If we come over to the form, let me just pop open the Nitro form. And this will come up in just a second. So actually, I can answer that question in a couple different ways. So JavaScript is using custom action. Yes, you can use custom scripts. Oh, custom script action. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes, that is the answer. Custom JavaScript is the answer to that question, I believe. You can also use, if you didn't want to use the Invoke REST API actual interface that we have, you could. There is an Invoke script option. I think that is here. I believe it's in custom actions at least. But yeah, that is what I'm talking about here. If you're building out that REST API call within JavaScript, we don't have, like I said, we don't have the slick UI for that like we do for the workflows and custom actions, but that option is there. So if you want to do the REST API call in the form itself, you can do a custom script. You can also do it from the button, like there's the script button on here. See script action button like this, put on the form, and now you can build out that JavaScript call from within the form itself on button click, do this. So again, just kind of going back to the difference there, that this is going to happen when the button gets clicked. This one's going to run when the form gets loaded. So it kind of depends on how you want to, invoke that. Okay, and then there is a question about, is there an example JS code for calling web service and then pre-filling the fields? That's a great question. I will talk to my team to see if we can provide anything on that front as far as an example code for calling the web service action and then filling out forms on the field. I believe, I know it's possible. I'm having trouble. I don't know. I'm not a JavaScript developer, so I know a little bit about it, but not enough. I know enough to know that it should be possible, and I think you just create variables and within the JavaScript and map those variables into a particular SharePoint field, et cetera, But how that's built, that is a little bit beyond my scope of knowledge. But I know it should be possible, and I can get you that information and kind of see what that example looks like for you for using JavaScript code to then update items on your SharePoint list based on the response from that call. Okay, great questions, everyone. Really appreciate the deep questions, and if there's any others, certainly pop them into that box. Happy to answer anything that you guys have to the best of my ability. In the meantime, I'm going to keep my eye on that questions box. I'm going to pop over to show you. There's a few, just kind of see. There's a few upcoming webinars and workshops that we're got on the plate. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about purchasing in SharePoint and Office 365. We're going to be then have another one talking about improving government services, and that's going to be coming down November 4th. We got this one tomorrow. As far as workshops are concerned, we have one up, and I guess we got to backfill the calendar here as far as workshops. We only got one scheduled next for middle of November about using the query list actions for the for each loops. I'll also talk more about that collection value option that I mentioned on today's call. And we'll get into that. It's basically different.
Nitro Workflow Designer coming out soon for workflows in December.
Yeah, that's right. That's going to be coming up. The Nitro Workflow. Yeah, we are going to be coming out with the Nitro Workflow Designer. I'm sure you guys have seen the Custom Actions Designer. So we're going to be doing something, working diligently towards having something available for our workflows as well in a similar way, so that you can see. The workflows in a designer interface similar to what you can do with the custom actions today. So yeah, that'll be coming up in December, probably after Thanksgiving, to talk about that workflow designer. We're hoping to get that out by the end of the year. That's our goal at the moment, is to have that out and released by the end of this year. All right, and then we did have another question pop in about using external data columns. Let me just take a look at that. So yeah, external data columns, kind of from the form perspective, might be another way to get data from an external database rather than using the REST API call. So it is an option. So if you use custom, we're using our own web service to do this. So yeah, so I guess that's the option here. If you want to do your own service to fetch the data, you could do that. It should be fairly immediate. And if it depends. So the question is, using external data columns, if we choose custom, if the call to the web service will happen from the browser or from the server. That's a good question. I think it depends on what you set up as your URL here. So if you're doing the custom option here, you're setting up your own web service. And that, to me, I think would be dependent on what you set up in that service. I don't know if we were controlling that, whether it's coming from the client side or the browser side on that, or the client side or the server side on that front. But I'll dig into that question more for you and get you an answer on that. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, if you have any other questions, pop them into the box, or if you come up with them after the call, then certainly send them along. We're happy to get those questions answered. That pretty much covers what I wanted to cover today. So I appreciate everyone's time in joining the workshop today. Lots of great questions. Really appreciate that. And yeah, we got a few things we got to answer here, get some definitive answers on some of these questions, and I'll follow up with those folks individually on those answers, and yeah, go from there. So if you have any other questions, or actually, if you have any workshop suggestions on different workshops we could do, certainly send those along as well. Send them to me, james.restivo@crocanyon.com. Send them along. Say, hey, I think this would be a great workshop, or that would be a great workshop. Or maybe there's one that we did a couple of years ago that's out of date. They want to see revisited. Happy to take suggestions on that stuff as well. So, these workshops are really for you, our Crocanyon customers, so that you can get the most use out of Nitro. So if you have anything you want to learn more about, or you want me to set up a workshop on, let me know that as well. But again, thank you all for joining today, and I'll look forward to chatting with all of you soon. And have a great day, everyone.